Okay, we're going to have one more industry perspective, and then I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you for questioning. So our final industry perspective is coming from Statkraft, big hydropower, a giant, of course, here in Norway, but also doing other things in renewables. Let's find out more. Here is SVP and Head of Corporate Strategy, Henrik Sætness. Henrik.
Thank you, and good morning. So I will talk about the energy system of the future. And, you know, I'm an analyst at heart, so it's kind of difficult to get this done in 10 minutes. The last time I spoke about it, I spent 45, but I will try to stick to my time schedule. First, just a few words on Statkraft. We are the largest producer of renewable energy in Europe. We have a production capacity of more than 19 gigawatts and last year we produced like 98% of our production was renewables. We, in addition, manage 22 gigawatts of renewables for other smaller producers globally. It makes us the largest in Europe also on that. We have for many, many years been the company in Norway investing the most money in renewables, and we aim to continue to be that going forward, investing more than 10 billion kroner every year in renewable generation globally. We're investing, you know, roughly 1.5 billion of that is in our Nordic hydropower fleet to upgrade and maintain it. And we're currently building Europe's largest wind farm here in Trøndelag. As some of you that have been outdoors can see that the wind is relatively good here. It will be more than 1,000 megawatts of installed capacity when it's completed. So when we are investing 10 billion in renewables, we believe that we need to have a good foundation for that work. And this is part of my responsibility. Part of that foundation is to have a solid analysis of the energy markets and the implications of that analysis. And this is a relatively simplistic chart saying, you know, the logic of our thinking. We start out by identifying the key trends and developments. So, for instance, over the last few years, understanding the cost development of solar and wind, what it is today, how it looks going forward is really important. We then put that together into kind of a global picture. How will the world's energy be supplied and consumed, for that matter, before we do detailed, you know, hour by hour and power plant by power plant analysis of the markets that we operate in. And this gives us some quite a lot of insight in terms of how the world is today and how it looks going forward. This looks, like I said, very simplistic. There are, of course, you know, a lot of feedback loops and complicatedness, which is not part of this. So let's get into the subject matter. First, I wanted to say something about where we are today, right? So in 2017, global investment in renewables was just under $300 billion. And fossil fuel generation, less than half of that. Nuclear, just a smidgen, right? And the total, almost $450 billion. So how much is that on a kind of global level? Well, it is roughly the same amount of money that goes into upstream oil and gas, and it kind of dwarfs the investment in coal supply across the world. So renewables is a big deal, people. It is already a big amount of money going into renewables in the world, and so I will tell you about it will grow going forward. And if we split the 300, you see this picture, roughly half is solar and 30% is wind, making solar by far the largest electricity generation technology when measured in investments, and wind a clear number 2, and then, you know, the rest is fighting for the smaller positions. And, you know, for the Norwegians, let's kind of recap that. 1/3 or the investment going into solar equals 1/3 of upstream oil and gas globally. It is already a big thing. So why has it become such a big thing? So it is really the cost development, right? Costs are coming down. Solar has fallen by 90% in cost over the last 10 years. 90%, and I think when humans are not really good at understanding these kind of big numbers. 90% is almost like going from something to free, right? Still not free, but it is a really big drop. Wind has fallen by 70% in the same period. And as this picture shows, we are now in a situation where in many countries, wind and solar is cheaper than building other power generation technology, and it is increasingly becoming so that it is cheaper than actually running existing power plants. Now again, let's pause and think through what that means. So it means that the picture to the right, or to your right, is India. In India, we are in a situation where if you own a coal-fired power station, you have built it, you've invested all the money, you are now in a situation where for quite a few of these power plants, it will be cheaper for you to build new solar panels than to run your existing power station. And someone talked about the ketchup effect earlier. This is really what we're seeing, right? So everyone has been waiting for this, and now we are really there where this is going to take off. So this will lead, in our predictions, to a large growth in renewable generation across the globe. So when we then do our analysis is really trying to support our strategy, our strategic evaluations and our investments. So we're trying to, as best as we can, try to predict what is going to happen, right? So we're not saying we want to reach this target or we're trying to get to a 2-degree goal. We're saying here are the trends, how will they play out? And we run multiple scenarios. Here are 2 of them. So the base case scenario is pretty obvious for you to understand. That's what we base what we believe the most in a way. Then we also have a scenario which we call the low emission scenario, where we just take the same trends and say, all right, let's assume that they go faster and more forcefully. Then we get to a situation where global power supply has a renewable share of between 50% and 70%. In 2040. At the same time, as Asgeir was pointing out, on a global scale, this leads to a large, it's also a large increase in the consumption of power. So I think everyone agrees that that's going to happen. Even the IEA has kind of an increasing amount of power going into the energy system. So what will that lead us to? What kind of energy system will we in fact get? So here we use Germany 2040 as an example. We could have used UK, could have used Chile as examples, but Germany is a relatively good example as it has a good mix of resources, but not fantastic in any sense of the word on a global scale. But it is a good example of a country transitioning away from a fossil fuel-dominated system. So in Germany in 2040, we predict roughly 80% of electricity will be renewable, and this then is in a situation where the electricity consumption is significantly higher than today, as transport is electrified, as in 2040 also heating and industry will have moved towards electrification, hydrogen-based solutions, and/or biofuels. And in the power system, we will then have shifted from having all the flexibility coming from thermal sources, including coal, to a much more diverse set of flexible resources. Quite a lot of gas generation, which predominantly is there to supply the flexibility. So a lot of gas-fired generation in terms of capacity, but it runs at a 25% load factor. We also see a significant increase in interconnection. Not as dramatic as Asgeir's scenarios, but still quite some. And again, this is now based on our beliefs in what is possible, what can happen, right? What we believe will happen, in fact. And we also see, 20 gigawatts of batteries and demand-side management flexibility backing up this system. And this leads to a power system dominated by renewables, but with the same security of supply as we see today. So finally, what kind of implications, opportunities do we get out of that? All right, so renewables will be the cheapest source of energy. It will mean that, politicians, governments will want to take advantage of renewables to create competitive power supply for its businesses, industries, and its citizens. And with power then becoming green, levies, taxes, policies aimed at reducing power consumption will need to be redesigned. It also means for businesses like ourselves, a huge amount of renewables will be built, and other sectors will go through significant changes over the course of a few decades. This will create a lot of opportunities for investors and businesses. And not least, in our optimistic, realistic scenario, the low emission scenario, we get to a path which is consistent with 2 degrees, maybe a bit lower even. So it kind of gives us a possibility to limit global warming to 2 degrees, and I would say like a fighting chance to go for 1.5. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Henrik. So he's definitely an optimist, isn't he? Opportunities, fighting chance, quite an upbeat kind of presentation there. Do you agree?